Iran has dismissed sanctions over its nuclear program as unlawful after the United Nations reimposed them for the first time in a decade. Tehran has recalled its ambassadors to Britain, France and Germany in response. The sanctions include an arms embargo, a ban on uranium enrichment and other measures. Iranians say they're already feeling the pinch.
It appears to be business as usual in Tehran, but that business is about to get significantly more difficult. The UN has slapped sanctions back on Iran. We'll be ruined. Ordinary people really might not be able to live the way they do now.
Prices are already crushing people, and now imports will become harder, exports practically non-existent.
I was buying things for my home, and in just 3 days, everything suddenly got 10 million tomans more expensive, even though the dollar hasn't gone up much yet. In 2015, Tehran signed a landmark deal with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany and the EU, to limit its nuclear program. The US later withdrew. 10 years later, the foreign ministers of Germany, France and the UK say they had no choice but to trigger the snapback procedure as Iran was not meeting its obligations. The sweeping sanctions include an arms embargo, a ban on uranium enrichment, a bar on transferring missile technology, a freeze on all global assets and a travel ban. The so-called E3 leaders hope the sanctions will put pressure on Iran to come back to the diplomatic negotiating table. Iran has denounced the move and is now weighing up its options.
Iran considers the restoration of the UN sanctions to be illegal. Iran does not consider itself legally bound to recognise those illegal resolutions, including the suspension of uranium enrichment.
Iran's rial currency fell to a new record low of 1.1 million against the US dollar, sending food prices even higher and making daily life much more challenging.
If we continue to get into a fight with the outside world and become isolated like North Korea, good things won't happen at all. We're already seeing the impact of this. The dollar rate is going up.
I would have suspended the nuclear program at least 5 years ago and would care about the people. We could have done a lot of things to get rid of these difficulties.
Iran's position as a pariah state is solidifying, as are its economic woes.
Kamran Matin is a senior lecturer in international relations at the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. He joins us now. Kamran, as we just heard in that report, Iranian people are bracing for more economic pain. Are sanctions the most effective way to pressure the government?
Good evening, Rebecca. Thanks for having me on. The truth is that the sanctions have been on Iran for quite a long time, on and off, since the discovery of Iran's nuclear program back in 2003. So the burden of the sanctions have largely fallen on ordinary people. The government and its allies within state institutions, they have been receiving government aid, state subsidies and so on, and especially IRGC and other security and military organizations have used the sanctions to create a sort of shadow economy from which they themselves and especially the commanders have benefited. Prior to these sanctions, the United States sanctions, unilateral sanctions following the withdrawal of the United States from the nuclear deal signed in 2015, and especially its secondary sanctions, which would punish any country dealing with Iran, which also had trade relations with the US, had already caused a massive impact on Iranian economy and the welfare of the ordinary people. With the UN sanctions back, many more countries are bound legally to observe those sanctions, and this is likely to worsen the economic situations. On the other hand, as we saw in the package, many Iranians believe that the nuclear program, which produces close to zero energy or has any significant impact on Iranians' livelihood, is a burden which has caused all these sanctions and confrontation with the West, including the war with Israel. So the nuclear program is increasingly an unpopular project which is causing all this damage to Iranians, and people want to have a say on its continuation.
Meanwhile, hardliners in Iran condemned the nuclear deal and engagement with the West. Do you expect that those hardliners will have more of a say in the government now?
Clearly, there is two camps within the establishment, as always has been the case within the Iranian political system. So the so-called hardliners believe that Iran has to leave NPT and go towards, formal weaponization of its nuclear program, even testing a nuclear weapon that would be the guarantee against any future attacks by either Israel or United States or both of them. On the other hand, there are others within the establishment, the reformist camp, which actually control none of the key institutions in the state. They believe in concessions and talks with the West, in the hope that Trump's presidency will be over and somehow they will have another chance with the next administration to reach a deal. But at the moment, because of Supreme Leader's position against the talks with the United States, clearly the hardliners have the upper hand in the Iranian government.
But the Iranian regime maintains it will never seek to build a nuclear bomb. Do you believe that?
I find it difficult to believe, and many Iranians also do so, because Iran has had enrichment of 20%, 60%, on occasions even 80%, and those level of enrichment are not consistent with a civilian program. The problem lies in the fact that Iran claims that its nuclear project is civilian, and yet it gives pretext to its adversaries, including Israel in particular, by enriching to those levels to actually use it against Iran. And as I mentioned earlier, the consequences are largely for Iranians. So from the beginning, there has been this contradiction in the way in which Iran has used higher level of enrichment as a bargaining chip with the Europeans and the Westerners, but the other side has seen that as a sign that the program is not entirely civilian.
Kamran Matin from the University of Sussex, thanks very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's bring in Iran expert Ali Fathollah-Nejad. He is the director of the think tank Centre for Middle East and Global Order. Great to have you on the show. So, Tehran has warned the sanctions will be met with a harsh response. What could that look like?
For instance, the Iranian parliament will be openly debating whether Iran is going to withdraw from the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and is also likely to continue to do so. But then again, this carries a lot of risks, really, if Tehran really takes this move, because it could invite military action by Israel and or the United States. So in terms of retaliation, there are really no good options. I mean, other possibilities is some Iranian, destabilization acts, for instance, in international waters, in the Persian Gulf, but perhaps also some hostage taking. So there are several possibilities, but all of those possibilities are risky. So they will involve some cost for Iran.
What do you make of US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's calls for Iran to engage in direct talks with the US?
This is also the position of the Europeans. So the diplomatic door is not closed, despite snapback being reinstated. So I think that the continuation of diplomacy is in the cards. But whether diplomacy going to be successful is a very tricky question, because it would require Iranian concessions, which the Iranian side has not been willing to give. For instance, on agreeing on zero enrichment, that is stopping uranium enrichment.
Now, let's just actually talk a little bit about the sanctions themselves. How effective do you actually expect those sanctions to be?
I think, we will have to see, for instance, how China is going to deal with it. China is the main buyer of Iranian oil. So there is also the possibility that China will continue buying Iranian oil, but even at a steeper discount. But the reimposition of UN sanctions on Iran will certainly aggravate the economic crisis and economic isolation of Iran, because international actors are no more bound only by unilateral US sanctions, but also by UN binding sanctions. So this will certainly have an effect on the Iranian economy, with inflation rates going even higher, with the currency, as we've seen in the last few weeks, even losing much of its weight. So it will have some economic aggravation down the road. But this is not perhaps a total game changer.
All right, is there still a viable path for diplomacy, considering everything that we've spoken about today?
Well, we've seen several rounds of diplomatic efforts this year between Iran and the United States. And those rounds have not been successful. There have been the US demand, as I said before, for zero enrichment, and the Iranians have not been willing to accept that.
Right.
There's also the demand from the United States to limit the range of Iran's of Iranian missiles to 500 kilometers, so something that also the Iranians are not willing to accept. So US demands are somehow contradicting the business model of the Islamic Republic.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, Ali, but great to have your insights on the show. Iran expert Ali Fathollah-Nejad. Thank you.